Welcome back. I am Largo, and today we're checking out another SCP video. This one's going to be SCP-3041, the Red Artifact. It says it's safe, so I guess it's easy to contain. Other than that, Red Artifact doesn't give me a lot of information about it, so let's just jump right in and see what this Red Artifact is all about.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Miller, and the SCP we're going to be looking at today is SCP-3041. Object class, safe.
Seems to be some
Special
type of knife.
containment procedures. SCP-3041 is to be kept in a secure locker on site. Researchers are not to hold SCP-3041 or allow it to come into contact with their bare skin. As of 5/22/2015, all access to SCP-3041 is prohibited pending further review. Furthermore, until this review is complete, the information below should be regarded as outdated and possibly inaccurate. Description.
Okay, possibly inaccurate data. So this is probably one of those SCPs where the researcher assigned to it was writing stuff and they became affected. You see that a lot in these SCP entries, right? The main researcher who's responsible for researching and overseeing the project, the research on that specific SCP, gets affected by it, and suddenly their research notes become, you can tell that they've been influenced through their research notes. I almost feel that the SCP Foundation should have a contingency plan for this, because it happens so often. Like, I almost feel that for at least a certain amount of time, they should have a researcher, an assistant researcher, just like they normally do, looking at whatever SCP they're studying, right? But I feel like there should be a third researcher involved, and his job would specifically be to not deal with the SCP, not get anywhere around it, not be affected by it or anything like that. But this researcher's job is to watch cameras and review notes and do a psychological profile on the researcher himself to see if there's any kind of behavioral changes that happen to this guy while he's studying the SCP. I feel like they could cut off a lot of the problems that the Foundation has and that they run into if they were to actually observe the researchers as the researchers observe the SCP. I feel like they could nip a lot of this stuff in the bud. Now, don't get me wrong. When the researchers do get affected, that is still valuable data for the Foundation. Even the compromised notes are still valuable data on the SCP and how it functions and affects other people. But I think, or at least you would think, that they would have some kind of redundancy for this, because it is something that seemingly happens quite a bit.
SCP-3041 is a 12-centimeter iron knife of unidentified origin, with a hilt wrapped in braided leather. Radiometric dating shows inconclusive results for the age of the blade, but indicates the hilt was added within the past 2 centuries.
Okay.
The knife's surface is rust-colored and smells of spoiled meat. Despite extensive analysis, a source for this odor has yet to be determined.
Weird.
SCP-3041 exhibits its anomalous property only once it has been held by a sapient subject for a certain period of time. The length of time required to trigger SCP-3041's effect varies widely. The underlying mechanism remains unknown. Once SCP-3041 has activated, subjects will eventually experience a dream wherein they use SCP-3041 to attack one or more persons, removing and consuming their hearts. This dream is set wherever the subject initially held SCP-3041, and typically involves victims one would expect to find in this setting. In all cases, subjects do not recognize their victims. No victim is known to correlate with an actual person, alive or dead.
Okay, interesting. Couple things there. It's a knife. It seems like the blade is the original part. The handle was kind of added afterwards. It smells of dead flesh, the blade itself, which is kind of interesting, I guess, right? This definitely leans into it, especially where it says that it gives the people dreams of attacking people and consuming their hearts, right? So really brings to mind ritualistic sacrifice, especially with what is it, like the Mayans and the Incans and stuff, where they would remove the hearts from their sacrifices using ancient daggers and stuff like this, ceremonial daggers and whatnot. So, okay, I wonder if this is linked to any kind of like previous civilization. Let's see if they mention any kind of maybe markings on the dagger or anything, maybe some kind of cultural influences to maybe determine where this thing came from.
Subjects will often continue to have reoccurrences of this dream with little variation. Though amnestics reduce or even eliminate these occurrences, most subjects continue to show signs of emotional distress, guilt, and psychological trauma associated with post-traumatic stress syndrome. SCP-3041's effect can be triggered multiple times, producing new dreams in each case.
Okay.
SCP-3041 was found.
Okay, interesting. So they can intentionally trigger this. And another interesting thing is it says they never ever recognize the victims, and they can't actually find any record of any of these people from the dreams, whether they be alive or dead. So it's now, on one hand, it's not uncommon to have dreams where you just don't recognize people, and sometimes the people are even faceless. On the other hand, I think this is intentional for some reason. But yeah, and they can replicate and intentionally trigger these effects.
Found among the personal effects of Daniel Crenshaw, an elderly recluse and collector of historical antiques who committed on 02/15/1987. SCP-3041's anomalous nature was discovered when, in reviewing the contents of Mr. Crenshaw's collection, a researcher began experiencing dreams similar to those described in Mr. Crenshaw's note. Addendum.
Oh, okay, interesting. So this was found in the possession of someone who collected historical antiques. But again, they still haven't gone into any kind of like real description on the blade or any kind of background as to where it may have come
3041 1. Attachments. Access SCP-3041 Tests, Series 5 Log. Notably, this was the last series of tests performed with SCP-3041.
Okay.
Subject: D85373. Summary: D85373 was placed in a room alone with SCP-3041 and asked to hold it for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Result: sleep study revealed no unusual sleeping patterns. D85373 reported no unusual dreams. Researcher note: nothing unexpected.
All right, so after one experience with it, holding it for 10 minutes, nothing.
Subject: D85373. Summary: D85373 was placed in a room alone with SCP-3041 and asked to hold it for 10 minutes. Result: sleep study revealed acute night terrors. D85373 described a nightmare in which she used SCP-3041 to ritualistically mutilate another occupant in the room over the course of 30 minutes, finally devouring his heart. Although D85373 described the victim as someone wearing a D-Class uniform, the victim's description fit no D-Class personnel on site. Furthermore, no D-Class personnel on site were reported as absent or missing. Researcher note: still unable to determine what triggers SCP-3041's effect. Possibly repetition of exposure?
Interesting. So they repeated the experiment, same D-Class personnel, but they put them in there, same amount of time, doing the same thing, holding it. And this time the result was night terrors, having the dream of attacking another person in the room and devouring their heart. So, okay, and it says that the dream is typically always the same, which is violence against another person, ending with the removal and the devouring of the person's heart. And what determines or triggers the effect? Possibly repetition of exposure. Maybe not so much repetition as just exposure time. Like maybe if on the first day, rather than letting him hold it for 10 minutes, they let him have it for an hour, maybe he would have had those dreams on the very first night. So I don't necessarily think it's repetition, but maybe just length of exposure. And because they limited it to 10 minutes, it would take multiple exposures of a 10-minute time period in order to affect him. They did say that this was the last series of tests that they ran on 3041, but you would almost want to compare it with other tests with other D-class personnel. Like, okay, we're going to let this guy hold it for 10 minutes at a time, and we're going to let this guy over here hold it for only 1 minute at a time, and we're going to let this guy over here hold it for an hour at a time, and we'll see what kind of effects they have. Like, how many repeated exposures are we going to need to give the guy who only holds it for 1 minute for him to receive the same effects as the guy who held it for an hour for 1 day? So there's some testing here that still needs to be done, and there's a couple of things in here that are actually kind of bothering me with how vague they're being. Like, they're saying, okay, we gave the guy the dagger and told him to hold it for 10 minutes, but then they don't tell you anything about it other than that. Like, what did he do for 10 minutes? Did he just sit there in the room and just sit at a table and stare at the dagger for 10 minutes? Or did he swing it around? Was he having was he in the room pretending like he was stabbing someone for 10 minutes? Like, what was going on in the room during that 10 minutes where that person was holding the knife? Like, were they doing nothing at all? Were they completely inert? Were they acting something out? Like, I have questions, man. Come on, SCP, you guys are researchers. You should have more answers than this.
Subject: D85373. Summary: D85373 was placed in a room alone with SCP-3041 and asked to hold it for 10 minutes.
Repeating the test.
Result: sleep study revealed acute night terrors. D85373 described a new nightmare in which she had used SCP-3041 to attack and mutilate a researcher who entered the room at the end of the test. No researcher on site fit D85373's description. Furthermore, no researcher on site was reported as absent or missing. Researchers...
Okay, all right. So the night terrors are getting worse, and it would have been hilarious to see the look on the researcher's face who comes into the room to interview this D-class personnel after they'd woken up, and they sit down and say, "Hey, did you experience any dreams this time?" And the D-class personnel goes, "Yeah, I did. I had a very vivid dream of unaliving a researcher who came into the room after I had woken up to ask me if I had any dreams." If I was that researcher, I'd be like, okay, well, tell you what, I'm just going to step out of the room for a second and grab a cup of coffee. I'm going to let my assistant take over from here. Oh, man.
Note: we ought to include additional D-class personnel in the room during testing to see if they are incorporated into the subject's nightmares.
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. Adding variables into it to see if it changes the outcome.
Subject: D85373. Summary: D85373 was placed in a room alone with SCP-3041 and asked to hold it for 10 minutes. Result: sleep study revealed...
Wait a minute. Researcher's note just said we ought to include additional D-class personnel in the room during testing to see if they're incorporated into the subject's nightmares. They just said that. Next test was placed in a room alone with 3041. So the very next test immediately contradicts the researcher's notes of the previous test where he wanted to add another person. Now, something's going on here.
Acute night terrors. D85373 now described a nightmare wherein she attacked and devoured the hearts of 2 D-class personnel. Again, the description of the victims fit no on-site D-class personnel, and no D-class personnel were reported absent or missing.
Wait a minute. The outcome changed, though. Instead of devouring 1 D-class personnel, they devoured 2 D-class personnel this time. Wait a minute. I think I might see what's going on here. Let's see. Let's keep going on. I think I might see what's happening here.
Researchers note: despite having left explicit instructions to include additional D-class personnel in the room, the test was carried out with only D85373. I will oversee the next test personally. Also, staff has started to complain of a peculiar smell in the lab. Linked to SCP-3041?
Oh man, okay, alright. Let's keep going. I think I have a hypothesis forming in my head about what's happening here. Let's do this again.
Subject: D85373.
Again,
Summary.
placed in a room alone with 3041. This is after the second researcher note where he specifically says, despite his instructions to have another personnel in there, I will oversee it personally next time. And yet the research notes once again say, placed in a room alone. I think
D85373 was placed in a room alone with SCP-3041 and asked to hold it for 10 minutes. Result: several hours into the test, D85373 doubled over and complained of extreme stomach pain. Shortly thereafter, she passed out. After being rushed to the infirmary, it was determined that her stomach had ruptured. She died shortly thereafter from septic shock. An autopsy gave no indication as to the cause. Despite pronounced swelling, her stomach was empty.
I think I know kind of what's going on here. I think the knife not only affects people's minds, but it also physically affects the people that get stabbed by it. Let's continue on. I need more evidence for this theory. Let's continue on.
Researcher's note. After analysis of notes I took during this test, I found that I had made 9 separate attempts to have 2 D-Class personnel enter the room. I have no recollection of doing this. In fact, outside of D85373, there are, and never have been, any D-Class personnel assigned to SCP-3041. On top of all this, the smell throughout the lab has become unbearable. I've ordered the immediate cessation of all tests with SCP-3041 pending review by the site director.
Okay. All right. So here's what I think is going on with this knife. All right. I think this knife not only affects the person who is actually holding the knife, the one that's being directly exposed to the knife, but I think it also affects the person that is the victim of the knife. The anomalous effect of this knife is not only cognitohazardous in the fact that it affects the minds of the person using it, but I think it also physically eliminates the body, right? Not only does it physically eliminate the body, but it erases all memory of the victim as well, which is why no one remembers it. No one remembers sending an extra D-Class personnel in there because they just get completely just eradicated from your mind. So person A who commits the act doesn't remember it. It comes through as a dream. It's never written down in the research notes because the observer, the researcher watching person A and person B, the memory of that other D-Class personnel gets completely wiped. The memory wipe happens retroactively too, so it wipes out everything that person has ever done. Like, not actually wiped out their actions, but wipes out any memory of them having ever existed, which is why they continue to say no D-Class personnel are missing. Nobody in the facility has been reported missing. There's nothing missing from the ledger. And I don't actually think it destroys the individual, and I don't think it makes them invisible either, right? I think maybe it shifts them into another frequency of existence, so they're in a different dimension, if you will, and the only thing that doesn't shift over properly is the smell. So I think what is happening here is one person with the knife kills the other person, cuts them open, rips their heart out, consumes it. The person that's being affected by the knife can still interact with these people even though they're essentially phased out of existence, right? They have no memory of it, and when they come to from their fugue state, they were like, yeah, it was all just a very vivid dream. But I think the body is still literally lying there in the room, rotting, decomposing, creating that stench of rotting flesh that everybody is smelling, but nobody can interact with it physically. Whenever they do the scans, whenever they clean the room, they can never get rid of the smell because the material that's causing the smell is out of sync with their reality. I wonder if they were to take a Scranton reality anchor and bring it into the room and turn it on, if a bunch of dead bodies would just appear in the room. I think that's what's happening here with this. This is a pretty interesting SCP in the way that it's kind of functioning, because it's not just doing one thing. It's not just compelling a person to a violent action. It's compelling a person to a violent action and erasing all evidence that it ever happened. Even from the mind of the perpetrator, from the mind of the observer, it all goes away. But the person under the influence of the knife still feels these effects. That's why they can still feel like they ate someone's heart, because they literally did. That's why that person's stomach burst open from being full, because it literally was. But when the researchers opened it, they couldn't interact with anything, because all of that is out of sync with their reality. I think that's what's happening. I think this is almost like a dimension shifting tool / murder weapon. It's like a murder weapon that was created to eliminate a target, but then leave no evidence. Even inside the mind of the person, there's no evidence of a crime. It all just comes across as one person's bad dream. That's crazy. It's like now that I'm thinking about it, it's like the ultimate murder weapon. This is crazy. Let's keep going.
Access SCP-3041 tests admin memo log. 2. Researchers assigned to SCP-3041. Subject: immediate action, cease all testing.
Cease all testing.
After a careful review of laboratory procedures, test footage, and personal records associated with SCP-3041, the following inexplicable discrepancies have been noted.
See?
Despite regulations requiring...
I think some of the bookkeeping here, some of the bookkeeping that's a little bit more non-specific is going to show that people are going missing.
Each SCP have both a lead researcher and an assistant lead researcher. It appears only a lead researcher was assigned to SCP-3041. The reason behind this oversight is currently under review.
The reason behind that oversight is lead researcher got affected by it and probably murdered his assistant, and like I said, has no memory of it. And because the anomalous effects of that knife seem to phase that person and all memory of that person out of this reality, there's no evidence of it either. Man. Yeah. See, this is where I think that oversight on the researchers needs to be placed. There needs to be a researcher observing the researcher who's observing the SCP. Man, they need to start implementing that.
Shortages of D-Class personnel have been reported since testing with SCP-3041 began. These shortages have yet to be explained. While no D-Class personnel appear to be absent or missing, only a fraction of the expected number of D-Class personnel are present. Despite each test with SCP-3041 reported as lasting only 10 minutes, video footage for each test ranges from 10 minutes to 4 hours. Furthermore, when viewed, this footage exhibits what is believed to be a cognitohazard effect. Only portions of the video can be perceived by viewers.
Okay. So this is all kind of backing up what I'm thinking here, right? Okay, so the paperwork kind of does and yet kind of doesn't show what I'm talking about, right? Nobody's being reported missing, right? But there's a smaller number of people there than there should be, right? So let's say the SCP Foundation has a deal with the federal government to receive 1,000 prisoners every month, right? That's what they've come to an agreement on, and they've decided, okay, we will provide you with 1,000 prisoners every month that you can use as D-Class personnel. And every month, exactly 1,000 people will be shipped to you. And that goes on, and then suddenly testing with SCP-3041 starts, and suddenly we received everything that you told us that we were going to get, but it was only 900 instead of 1,000. And then the next month after that, well, it was only 750 instead of 1,000. And then the next month after that, it was only 500 instead of our normal 1,000. Everything in the paperwork still checks out. There's nothing missing. It's just that the load is smaller than it should be. So this is crazily sneaky how this cognitohazard functions. Like, it seems like it would even retroactively affect physical documentation like paperwork, right? Like, that's That's bonkers, man.
Despite several thorough examinations, the labs used for testing SCP-3041 continue to smell of rotting meat.
They continue to smell because the bodies are still there. They're just, you just can't see them or interact with them. For all intents and purposes, they're intangible except for the smell.
This effect remains unexplained and is likely very anomalous.
Also, they said that the video, right, even though the whole test is supposed to only last for 10 minutes, some of the video footage has video running for up to 4 hours. Again, they're super vague on what the person does. They never tell us what the person does in the room for that period of time, whether it be 10 minutes or 4 hours. They never tell us what the person actually does. It doesn't say if they stand there doing nothing or if they act violently and start hacking at something invisible. It doesn't say that they become aggressive or that they're docile. It literally gives us zero information, which is so uncommon for SCP entries. And then on top of that, the video can only parts of the video can be viewed. Here's my question. It seems like the people under the influence of the blade, the people actually grabbing the blade and doing the stabbing, it seems like they can see stuff that's not there, but they don't realize it because they're in some kind of fugue state. And once they come to, it's all perceived as a dream. So here's my question. Expose someone to the blade and then show them the video and see if they can see something that the other researchers can't because they've been in direct contact with the blade and they're affected by it. So let them watch the video and see if they can see anything that happens during that spot where no one else can see, and have them relay that information to the researchers. That's what I would do.
For these reasons, all testing with SCP-3041 is to be suspended until further notice. SCP-3041 is to be secured in an on-site safe box immediately. All labs used to test SCP-3041 are to undergo a Class 6 decontamination procedure, and all personnel involved in testing are to be examined for potential infection with antimimetic agents. Access SCP-3041 files. Note: log. The following note was found at Mr. Crenshaw's desk shortly after his body was discovered.
Okay, so Mr. Crenshaw was the historical antique collector that they had originally found the knife on. So let's see what his note says.
The nightmare began a year ago, and it still won't stop. In it, my arm is wet with blood, the knife in hand, glittering like a brilliant shining ruby. My heart beats like a drum before me. I see the faces of strangers, contorted in agony, screaming for mercy. A woman, a man, children, 3 girls and a little baby boy. How do not know them? I cut them open. I cut them open, and then I eat their hearts. I know it's just a nightmare, but it feels so real, so vivid. And there are times when I swear I can taste raw meat on the back of my tongue. I can feel it slide down my throat into my belly. I've lived a long, lonely life. I've never known friends or family. So why do I live in a house with so many rooms? Why does each room fill me with guilt and dread? Why can't I bring myself to go down to my basement? Why does it smell like rotting flesh? And why do I own a crib? My nightmare took place under the house. I've never gone down to look. I'm too afraid. If you're reading this, then you'll have to look for me. Maybe you'll find nothing. I pray you'll find nothing. Either I'm crazy or I'm the devil. Please, God, let me be crazy.
Very interesting, and again, kind of supports my theory. And it's super dark, right? That last entry is super dark, because if my theory is correct, then what would have happened here is this guy would have presumably killed his entire family and not even realized it, right? The physical reality of his life, like a house that's way too big for a single person to live in, or a crib being in his house. Like, those are tangible physical reminders that something is not right here. It's interesting. So yeah, that would imply that he took out his whole family and took out himself. Again, when they searched for it, they didn't find any bodies or anything. But they wouldn't, man. They wouldn't. And I love the fact that it's a safe class SCP as well. Alright guys, that was SCP-3041. Really like that one. I love the fact that it's classified as a safe SCP because it's not like sentient, it can't, you know, teleport. It's very easy to contain. Just throw it in a box, lock the box, and leave it alone. You know, this is like a cursed weapon. It's very interesting though. A lot of vagueness surrounds this. You know, I was kind of disappointed that they didn't really get into any kind of physical description of the blade. I think that it would have given us a lot of subtextual information if we had some kind of maybe at least location of origin, at least something to kind of lean on. Like, was this a murder weapon? Was this a cursed weapon? Was this some kind of tool of sacrifice? Was it made by like demons or something? Does this come from another reality? Did this come from another dimension? And when you stab people, it essentially attunes them to the dimension that it came from, which is why the bodies seemingly disappear. Like, there's so many questions around this simple little knife. And that's kind of why I like these much smaller self-contained SCPs. Like, there's so much that could be brought up out of this. There's so many ideas that spring to mind. Like, where did it come from? How was it used before it was found by the Foundation? Like, what is this thing's history? If it's literally erasing people from people's minds, like, what kind of a bloody track record does this weapon have? How many names are in this knife's book of murders? Like, how dangerous is this thing historically speaking? Like, you know, for all we know, this thing could have been used to assassinate presidents or pharaohs or kings or whatever, man. We don't even really understand how old this thing is, where it came from. But I do think its effects are highly interesting, the way it affects not only the person directly in contact with it, but it affects the person that's the victim of it, and it kind of affects everyone outside of that by erasing the memory of the victim from anywhere. But that being said, really enjoyed this one. Really enjoyed the red artifact SCP, and I hope you guys enjoyed the reaction. If you did, go ahead and consider clicking that like button. And if you haven't already, consider clicking that subscribe button to help the channel out. But most importantly, leave your comment or future suggestions for other videos you want me to check out down below in the comment section, and we can get to those in the future. As always, guys, thanks so much for stopping by. Thanks for watching the video. Take care of yourselves and have a great day.